It's about that time of year when people start to ask me, am I going to see a white Christmas? And this year, I believe there's reason for more people to be hopeful than we've seen in some recent years past. Fact of the matter is, though, most of the U.S. doesn't get white Christmases. They're a treat. So we're going to take a look at the historical averages and the forecast to let you know if you're going to be in luck this December 25th. We'll start with a look at what history says your chances of seeing a white Christmas are, and if you just want to get to the forecast, you can always skip ahead with the slider at the bottom. But this is a really cool graphic here from NOAA, and we'll start in the west, and what you're seeing is basically your chances at a white Christmas indicated by color. Those white colors indicate a 90+% chance, and you can see that pretty clearly across the higher terrain. It's all about how high up you are in elevation in the west, and you probably know if you live out here whether you're one of the haves or have-nots when it comes to white Christmases. Just looking at some places in the mountains, you can see, look at that, 100% chance here in the western portion of Wyoming. I haven't seen a 100 yet, but you can see clearly those chances pretty high. Meanwhile, you go down to the valley in California, and you're looking at a 0. So, again, all about elevation. I was looking at the Denver area earlier, too, and there you have about a 1 in 3 to a 1 in 4 chance for white Christmas. But it also depends on exactly if you're in the city or a little higher up the mountain. All depends, but you know out there. In the central U.S., it's not so much about elevation, but how far north you are. Again, sounds pretty obvious, but if you take a look at northern Minnesota, you might not know that it's actually about a 95 to 100% chance you get a white Christmas, even though there's no mountains or anything in there. I lived in Eau Claire for 2 years. I can tell you parts of Wisconsin, the western part of the state is about 3 and 4. I lived out there for 2 years, went 1 for 2. Is what it is. Chicago area we can take a look at as well. That's about 1 in 3, perhaps a little bit better. That's right from Midway Airport. But the farther south you go, you take a look at St. Louis. Now you're looking at 1 in every 6 years or so. We also see on the lake shores too, if we move to the Great Lakes region, some of those brighter colors as well. Off of Superior when you're farther north, that's almost a 100% chance. Off of Michigan, 77. Here by Erie, we're looking at a chance of about 3 and 4, even out by Erie. And on Tug Hill, that's up in upstate New York, you have a very good chance as well, greater than 90%. We'll move to the east now, and we'll take a look. Actually, I want to mention if you're in the mountains out there by West Virginia, that's about 2 and 3. You get up towards the mountains in New England, we're looking at about, look at that. That's about 4 and 5. So you're doing well with elevation. New England elevation matters a lot too, but even the coastlines here, this is Hingham, Mass. That's the Boston area, 1 in 3. So Boston 1 in 3 winters typically white. I can tell you living out here, hasn't been that much recently. But even places farther south, you get to the New York metro area, and we're looking at about a 1 in 7 chance. So it all depends. And in case you're curious, I know some people may be wondering, some of those areas farther south, just for fun, we'll take a look at Nashville, giving us a 0. Oklahoma City, it's given us a probably pretty close to 0. 2%, 1 in 50 years. So it's not impossible, but those chances are pretty low. But what about this year? I mentioned I'm more optimistic about many areas, and we're going to jump into what we're looking at this year and how it's going to compare to some of those historical chances for your white Christmases. So as we take a look at white Christmas chances this year, we obviously need to know where there's snow on the ground right now. And you can see across a good chunk of the northeastern U.S., you got snow on the ground, mainly in the higher elevations out there. Of course, your mountains in the west have a lot of snow. And we have a little bit in the north central U.S., and a little bit in the mid-Atlantic as well. But as a whole, there's not actually that much on the ground. So we're going to be really reliant on the snow that's expected to fall. But one of the things we can take a look at, of course, is whether it's going to be cold enough to begin with. And I'm going to show you some of our temperature anomalies, so how warm or cold it is relative to average. And there is some promise here because you're seeing these blue colors take over, especially as we get into the upcoming weekend. And what we're seeing is a very cold air mass begin to take shape across the eastern U.S. Keep in mind, this is the weekend before Christmas, so the 21st and 22nd. So clearly there is going to be cold enough air for there to be snow. And if we take a look at this moving into the Christmas holiday, well, at least here we are, Christmas Eve, it's going to stay cold enough in the eastern U.S. for any snow that falls to stick around. Now, it gets a bit challenging in the north central U.S. where those temperatures rise quickly, and we're looking at bigger changes leading into the holiday. So keep that in mind. Going to stay cold in the east, but we have that warm air coming into the central U.S. right before Christmas, which will eat away at anything that does fall. I'm going to show you what some of our weather models are telling us right now. And if we move this forward, our first chance for some snow actually comes pretty early on. This is later in the week here, Thursday. We have snow that's going to fall in the higher elevation in New England. That's very likely. So Higher terrain in New England looking great here. We also have this guy. This is going to be an interesting one, a very interesting player. Clipper system, it's going to cut through the north central U.S. That'll drop some snow, exactly how much we'll look at here in a minute. And then it gets farther east, hits some dry air, begins to slow down. But we also have this player out here. If they can come together, you might get a few inches of snow on the coastline. Right now, it doesn't quite look like it's going to happen, but that's going to make things interesting, and it keeps more people in play. Regardless, it will drop some snow in the mid-Atlantic and eventually skirt away. And here we are, Christmas Eve, moving into Christmas Day. I want to mention there's one more dark horse player here. I'm not seeing so much on the European model that we're looking at, but there is a low chance for some snow on Christmas itself, which could be a saving grace if none of these previous storms work out. But let me show you the American model too, just give you an idea of what it's spitting out. And it's very similar. Again, a very good outlook for snow in the higher terrain in the Northeast. We got this clipper coming in across the north central U.S. That's going to be helpful out there. And it does try to get to the Northeast, but again, it dries out quickly. So might be tough if you're not in the higher terrain out there. And we have this system over the water that also scoots away. Now, you can kind of see it tries to develop snow, but it's already too far out. I also want to mention Christmas, though. You got this next system that could drop a few inches if it materializes. This is literally early morning before the sun rises on Christmas. So kind of exciting there. I want to mention, though, those coastlines, you really got to hope those two systems near the water come together. And if you want that to happen, if you want this guy to drop some snow out in the southern New England area, you need the cold front coming through to back off a little bit. So we'll have to wait and see. If that cold air is delayed at all, that's good for White Christmas chances if you're in the Northeast. So now that we've looked at that, I want to take a look at some of those snowfall chances, or amounts, I should say. And we take a look at our, we'll go back to our European model first and show you what it's spitting out in terms of amounts. And this is interesting because you're going to see, with some melting in the north central U.S., we got that chance to hang on to some of that snow. Given that the amounts we're looking at are generally, if you're in North Dakota, 3 to 6 inches. If you're in Minnesota, Wisconsin, could be 2 or 3. Northern Minnesota is interesting. Only an inch. Temperatures likely stay below freezing, but of course, some of that snow, it does evaporate. It does sublime and go away. Looks good for the interior of New England. You can see, though, on the coastline, really not so much out there. But if we got that Christmas day, that Christmas morning snow, maybe you fill this in here a little bit. That's the European model. We can take a look at the American as well, and you're going to see something pretty similar here. There's your snowfall. A good, North Dakota looks like it's in great shape. Minnesota and Wisconsin, I believe this is enough. If you can get 3 inches of snow, that'll be enough. We're looking at what is pretty consensus right now, 3 to 5 inches. Even with the warming, that should be enough. You only need 1 inch on the ground for it to be considered a White Christmas. And, of course, very good in the high terrain out here in New England. Those lake shores look all right as well, especially because in the Northeast it's going to be so cold. Not going to lose much of that. Let me show you Christmas morning too, because this is kind of sneaky. This is just one run on the American model, but you can see it brings a decent snowfall to southern New England. I don't think that's very likely, but some light snow, I won't rule it out. I'd have hope out there. Can also take a look at our snow depth too. I'm going to go back to our Euro, and I don't use this very often, but it can be helpful if we take a look at what it's spitting out for the actual snow depth on Christmas morning. You can see it is in favor of a White Christmas across the north central U.S., across the upper part of the mitten in Michigan. So favorable out there. Of course, we know our mountains in the west are favorable, and in New England, the higher terrain. So that's what I'm thinking we get for a White Christmas this year. Those mountains in the west are almost a guarantee. It's the north central U.S. where things get interesting. It's a battleground. I don't believe you're going to get it if you're in Chicago. Same thing if you're in Detroit. It looks like you're just going to be out of the way of enough of that snow to fall. The more interesting area is going to be New England and how those two storms come together. But this really, I think, is a good representation of where those White Christmases will occur. You'll notice, too, that you have some extra snow on the ground out there a little farther south into Iowa and to South Dakota, but that melts away a bit with the milder temperatures as we head into Christmas morning. So you got to watch out for that. This is the trickiest part is right here. Again, how much melting occurs and if we get that storm in the Northeast. But all in all, not a bad year for some places that haven't had it recently. The north central U.S. have been pretty dry, believe it or not, for the past few years. But exciting prospects that we'll continue to watch. And, of course, if you follow along here, we do updates every Sunday. So, of course, we're going to have an update coming up here. And we'll have a look when we're just about 3 or 4 days out. But I'm hopeful for a lot of you guys, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that we can get that system off the New England coast, and maybe that Clipper drops us some more snow ahead. So looking forward to it. It'll be a good Christmas. If you're in the South, well, enjoy your green Christmas. At least it's going to be warm in the central U.S. And stay warm out there in the East, where it is going to be cold, whether you see snow or not. We'll see you next time, guys.